Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being so prompt. Everyone is settled in and ready to go. So we're going to go ahead and get started a minute before 1:30 to leave enough time to make sure that we have plenty of time for the questions and answers and robust discussion that we would like to have. Thank you so much for joining us for this session. My name is John Betts. I am the Assistant Vice President of Program Development and Innovation at Breaking Ground. And we're here to talk about animals in supportive housing, obviously, but I would like to start by sharing a bit of data that we gathered a few years ago about some people experiencing homelessness, about folks that we work with who are experiencing homelessness and living with their animals outside or in transitional housing. But before I do that, I should probably say, by way of full disclosure, that I have 2 dogs, one of whom is very anxious and on 2 psychotropic medications, so I'm probably not the most objective moderator for this panel, but I'm very glad to be here having this conversation.
Dee Dee's the best.
So anyway, during the point in time survey that we took in July of last year across our homeless services programs, we found that clients were caring for approximately 19 dogs, 5 cats, and a snake. And some of the folks were in transitional housing, but some of the folks were living on the street with their animals and were very concerned about being separated from their animal when they came inside. And so obviously we're here to talk about animals in supportive housing, but many of the folks who were serving on the street end up in supportive housing. And I also often think about a point that I heard made by Laura von Dermott-Lipsky from the Trauma Stewardship Institute. Some of you may be familiar with her during a training. And she said that one of the reasons that animals can be so healing for us is that so much of the trauma in the world is perpetrated by humans, which I think is really powerful. So I bring all of this up about folks experiencing homelessness prior to moving into supportive housing because if we, as supportive housing providers, are going to uphold our commitment to welcome our tenants into our buildings, that also means honoring the things that are important to them, which for many folks includes their animals, whether those are pets, emotional support animals, or service animals. And actually, in one study that was cited by NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, 60% of respondents with chronic mental health conditions considered their pets to be as important as family members. So I'm hoping that we can frame this conversation broadly around the human-animal bond and the way in which that can contribute or pose challenges to the broader community of supportive housing. Alok spoke this morning very eloquently about the importance of community and love, and so I now want to bring animals into that conversation as well. But to help get the conversation started, I'm going to show a very brief video from a veterinarian by the name of Biana Tamimi that Breaking Ground has partnered with in recent months to provide opportunities for integrated human and veterinary healthcare. And you'll hear a little bit more about that in the panel. I'd been hoping that Biana could be a part of this panel today, but she's traveling and was not able to attend. So she sent me this video and is going to tell us a little bit about the integrated One Health model, which is this model that we're starting to use to think about the human-animal bond and the way in which we can care for both humans and animals and their relationship.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Biana Tamimi and I lead the Street Dog Coalition team here in New York City. Street Dog Coalition is a national nonprofit organization with local branches all over the country that provides free medical care and other related services to pets of people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. Our goal is to provide care for the lives on both ends of the leash through a One Health practice. One Health is a collaborative and transdisciplinary approach to providing care and services that recognizes that the health of people and animals are interconnected, and it uses the power of that human-animal bond to improve access to both human and vet services. The human-animal bond between people and pets can be so strong that folks experiencing homelessness may reject services like housing or food for themselves to provide care for their pet, and are likely to access care for their pet before they access care for themselves. So in a One Health clinic, we provide health care to both people and pets during the same clinic.
Could we have AV come in and turn up the volume on this for the next videos? Is that possible? Okay, while they work on that, we're not going to show any more videos for a while, so I will proceed. Basically what Biana said, I know it was a little difficult to hear, but the idea behind One Health is that you treat the human and the animal bond rather than treating the human and the animal separately. That some folks, many folks with animals may seek out care for their animals before they seek out care for themselves. And so this is a way to get folks in the door, hopefully into human health care, so that they'll start receiving care for themselves, along with getting free veterinary care for their animals. And we'll talk more about that as we get to the panel. So overall, I'm going to ask that the sort of framing concept for this conversation that we're going to have be about the human-animal bond and about community, and about the sort of radical love that Alok talked about this morning. So obviously there are realities and challenges that come along with running supportive housing with only humans as tenants, and so adding animals to the mix certainly adds its own challenges, but also, I would argue, opportunities. And I'm hoping that the conversation will open some space about what opportunities and bright spots those can be. So the session's going to be broken into roughly 3 parts. The first part is going to be an abbreviated version of a training that Kiz Robinson, who you'll meet in a moment, did for Breaking Ground staff about safe interaction with client and tenant animals after we had an incident at one of our sites. The goal here is to provide you some concrete tools that you can take with you, along with some food for thought. And then we'll transition to a panel discussion, and then we'll leave plenty of room at the end for question and answer. So given that Kiz is probably the first dog trainer to speak at this conference, I want to provide a little bit more of an introduction. Again, by way of full disclosure, I got connected to Kiz because she helped do work with my family and I for the very anxious aforementioned dog. And in having conversations with her, I was struck by just how trauma-informed the work that she does with dogs is. And I actually learned a lot about working with humans by working with a very anxious dog, surprisingly. And I think you'll be able to sort of draw those connections as well. And then I came to find out that Kiz had been doing trainings with supportive housing providers, homeless service providers as well, often through a program through New York City Animal Care and Control that connects folks to training for folks who are at risk of having to rehome their animal due to behavioral issues. And so she's worked with folks in supportive housing and who have experienced homelessness in that capacity. So Elizabeth Kiz Robinson has been training dogs professionally since 2014. She's a certified professional dog trainer, knowledge assessed through the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers, and a certified dog behavior consultant through the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants. She works virtually with clients around the world and in person in her home borough of Brooklyn. She's volunteered with the Rikers Rovers program, teaching incarcerated youth to train dogs for adoption, and worked for A Fair Shake for Youth, an organization that brings therapy dog teams into New York City schools. Both programs use force-free, evidence-based animal training methods to promote empathy and draw parallels between how we interact with dogs and how we interact with other humans. And she lives with Legs, the cat, and Watson, the dog, whose relationship is a work in progress. So I'm going to hand it over to Kiz, and I'm going to hand it the computer over to her colleague Julie to run.
I'm just super glad to be here because it's dog training isn't all playing with puppies, and today has been a particularly sad day in my job. And it's nice to be here with people who are trying to prevent some of the stuff that I have to deal with. That I am privileged to be part of, but that hurts. So as John said, as dog trainers, the people that I work with understand that people are less likely to seek services or to accept them if their whole family isn't supported and accepted. And then we took that a step further and said, well, why isn't that possible? Well, maybe if service providers don't feel safe, it's harder for them to provide services. I can help you feel safe. I can give you some tools to help you be safer when you're working with animals so that you're better able to provide those services and better able to welcome the entire family. So that's what I have to talk about today. And I just want to quickly introduce you to the team that I work with who does all of this. So I'm Kiz. I work under Pumpkin Pups to work on classes, and we built this presentation together. My business is 2B Dog Training. This is Julie Wintraub. She's also has many fabulous certifications, and she is, her business is Possum Pup Stars. Vivian Arzamanian is the Pumpkin Pups founder, and Allison Bueller is another member of the team, and they couldn't be with us today. So, that sounds like they're dead. They're not dead. They're just like working with dogs somewhere, not here. They're fine. All right, so what are our goals for today? This is an abbreviated version. I'm going to give you what I can in the time allotted. As evidence-based trainers, we find that most lay people, a lot of stuff you're going to see in mainstream media, isn't going to be able to appropriately interpret dog body language for you. So you may not get safe, appropriate information from folks off the street or from things you randomly get on the internet. So I want you, by the time you leave, to feel confident requesting safety measures from your tenant before and during encounters, to understand some protective strategies for uncertain situations, to be able to identify a dangerous situation, and be able to navigate a safe exit, whether something is going great or not, okay? So we're gonna start with body language, and I'm gonna warn you it's gonna get interactive, but you just get to sit there and yell stuff at me, so it's gonna be fun. Can you time a minute when I tell you to, please? Thank you. Okay, so dog body language is where we start. I could teach 2-3 days on this, but I have 30 minutes, so we're gonna do it hot and quick. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask you 2 different questions, and you're gonna shout out answers. There's only gonna be a minute, so just shout out what you want. Julie's gonna record it for us, and we're gonna talk about it afterwards. So a minute on the clock for this question. What dog body language makes you feel safe? What do you see that says, wagging tail? Wagging tail, what else?
Ears to the back.
Ears to the back, what else? Barking makes you feel safe? Okay, good, what else? Running around, sitting? Standing and sniffing? Sniffing. Sneezing, okay. Sneezing, that's a good. To belly? See that? Head rubbing, yeah, what else? Showing belly? Hanging tongue, yep. Anything else? Laying on their back with a face, yep. What else?
Asking to be petted.
Asking to be petted, what does that look like? Oh, reaching out, grabbing you, nuzzling you, putting their head on, yeah, okay. What else? Sleeping? Sleeping is very, that makes me feel great. I do love that. That is fun. Anything, what else? Anything else? Scratching? Yeah, sitting and scratching. What else? Anybody? I was told you guys wouldn't be very interactive. You got a bad rap. Time. All right. So, second question, because we're not going to talk about anything until we ask all the questions. What body language makes you feel unsafe? What makes you feel like you got to leave? Growling. Tail up. Tail between their legs. Barking. Fur spiked up. Ears up. Launching towards you. Foaming at the mouth is very bad. What? Showing teeth. Eyes darting. Did I get everybody back here? I feel like I'm neglecting you. Anybody? Panting. Yep. Chasing you. Very bad. Circling. Okay. Aggressive. What does that look like?
Kind of like just ready to pounce.
Ready to pounce and maybe a little crouched. Okay. What else?
Sometimes when they poop, I get nervous to be around.
Tell me why. Tell me more.
Because they're vulnerable, so they don't trust you.
When they're in a vulnerable position and they might feel they need to defend themselves, that's something that not dog people don't notice. Yeah.
They're vulnerable at the time.
Looking you straight in the eye, you're gonna hear a lot about that later. Yeah. Time. All right. This is good. All right. Now Julie's gonna put those up because I was never gonna. I practiced this with some dog people. They gave me like 4 answers each. It's ridiculous. Okay. Woo. All right. So we got a lot of stuff to look at, and running around looks like it could have been on both. There's a couple other things that were on. Scratching. Tails, for instance. So waggy tail is on safe. Tail up is on unsafe. Yeah, you're right. So tails are really good things to learn from, but they mean a lot of stuff. So, excuse me, they're high and tight, anything stiff. Your basic body language thing is anything stiff and tight, not great. Anything loose and wiggly, pretty good. So if a tail is up really high and going like this, we call it a flagging tail, maybe just be careful, because even if that dog's having a great time, I always talk about how that's a tail that could either be a party or a riot. Like, it's when you go to your team wins and you're out in the parking lot and you're like, it's gonna be one little thing and the happy people are gonna be very angry people, right? So that's what tails are like. You're looking for a tail that's maybe like where it attaches to the dog, it's kind of at the midline, and it's like waving like a flag in a gentle breeze. That's good, right? That's great stuff. What else do we have? So let's talk about scratching. Scratching could just be itchy, but also sometimes it's a displacement behavior, right? There's a lot of displacement behaviors for dogs that we might not notice. The biggest one that I think people discount is eye contact. Somebody was talking about eye contact that made them feel unsafe. Direct eye contact, not great with dogs. They don't love it. And they will often use an appeasement signal of looking and looking away. And that's easy to miss. They're like, oh, they didn't care about me. Did they not care about you? Or did they care about you deeply and they're telling you no thank you? Okay, my time is running out, so there's one big one. Somebody said that showing their belly made them feel safe. Raise your hand if you think that is always the case. Very good, very good. So, right? So a couple people feeling brave. Does it make you always, okay, so here's the thing. Mostly, yeah, but that's also how a lot of people get bitten in the face. Yeah. It's also why alpha rolls are bad. Don't roll a dog on their back. Loose wiggly. If the dog is like loose and wiggly and they flop over and they show me their belly and their arms, their legs are all splayed out, that dog probably wants a belly rub. Sure, totally. If a dog kind of like goes down like this and maybe in little digital kind of increments and their legs stay up like this, right? That is showing you, so when you were talking about when they're pooping and they're vulnerable, it is showing you their most vulnerable self and asking you not to kill them, right? I am the big, stay with me for more, I'm such a downer. But this is why I want you to be careful, right? And there's a whole other slide about when not to touch a dog. But those are things to be careful of, right? We have a handout that's going to come around afterwards, but there are some resources there for learning dog body language, and that's the number one thing that can keep you safe, right? So I want you to learn more about, if you can learn nothing else, learn that. So let's transition to the next piece, and this is, coming towards you is not necessarily an invitation. Just because a dog is coming up to you and wants to, and rubs up against you or sniffs you, a lot of things people were saying here that makes them feel safe, doesn't mean they want you to interact with them. A lot of very frightened dogs are information seekers who feel like, I gotta get up here and I gotta learn what she's all about, and then they get here and I go, oh hey, and they're like, holy crap, you're right here, and it turns out I don't like you. So you are not obligated to interact with the dog. On this handout, there are a few suggestions of ways you can engage with the person about their dog and help their dog and appreciate that dog without touching or looking at or reaching towards a dog, okay? So don't feel obligated. All right, so it's not just dogs, right? We're part of the problem. We got to talk about human body language. I think in this room, you are probably, like, the way you're answering the dog body language questions tells me that you already think a lot about how you are perceived when you're greeting other humans. But we need to talk about how some of human body language is taken in a similar way as humans take it, and some of it is not, is not great. So I got 4, A, B, C, and D. Which one of these human body language examples do you think a dog would like least? You think they'd like C the least? What else? Got a lot of A's. Anything else? B. B. Okay, we got a lot of disagreement. I enjoy that. It's A, right? So I was just talking about how one appeasement signal for dogs is to look away, right? Face to face, eye contact, straight on greetings. Dogs don't love it. And I know that we live, like many of us live in a city where dogs meet on leash face to face all the time. It's not really setting everybody up for success, right? Because that's not nice. Dogs greet nose to tail or nose to side, curves again, right? Good body language is curved. And that straight on, hi, how are you? Which we do as people, like, hey, how you doing, man? Dogs don't love it. And a lot of them learn to put up with it. A lot of the behavior that we love that makes us feel safe is learned behavior because dogs live with us, and it's important that we're calm and polite so that they are safe. So A would be the one I would say, let's try no. All right. Now, technically, there's a case to be made for the other three, but I hold that there is one that's the best. So knowing what you know now, which of the remaining three, B, C, or D, do you think a dog would like best?
C.
What
I think B.
What were you saying?
C.
C? You think C? Okay. Some dogs would love C. I mean, I agree there. But for D, and I'm like, to be fair, I'm also basing this on the fact that you're going to be meeting people and dogs, so you have to talk to the people. So D. D is the one, if I had to say, here's one thing to do, go with D, right? Talk this way. Enter this way a little bit. Keep your eyes down. Don't be looking a dog in the eye, but kind of keep yourself calm and sideways. Not like, I don't want you to be creepy and scared, and I don't want you to be going slowly and creepily, but just keep it low. Keep a little bit to the side, not quite so, hi, how's it going, right? Okay. All right, next, I got locked out. Next, we're ready to talk about some safety measures. So, if you have the luxury of asking for prep from someone you're gonna meet, then let's talk about what that might look like. You could ask for the dog to be on a leash or in a crate, behind a baby gate, ask to put the dog in another room, or you could ask to meet initially or for the entire meeting outside of the tenant's apartment. If these might not be necessary, but there's a lot of excitement around doors and around new people entering. And so if we can give the dog a little bit of space from that commotion, then we set them and you up for more success. So the first way we do that is just with a physical barrier, so the dog we don't have to rely on the dog feeling safe enough to choose to back up from you. And we give you a minute to say hello to the person and feel calm before we also get introduced to the dog. If you have control of a space, if you're meeting in your offices, if there's a drop-in center or some kind of temporary housing and you have funds to use, you might have some gates available. You might have some crates available. There are giant X pens, they're like play pens for kids, that you could have. If you have one of those, you have the ability to just put yourself in an airlock. You don't have to gate the dog off, you can gate yourself off, you know? Or you can gate the dog off, you can gate whatever feels safer and gives the dog a chance to have a safe space where they don't have to worry that someone's going to invade. You could also go with a D-ring in a wall, so like D-rings and tethers. You could tether. Tethers are, some dogs they feel confined and that's hard for them, but that's a possible thing. I think having extra leashes for tenants if they don't happen to have one or they don't generally use one, if that's a guideline for your facility, you could have leashes available for people. Some dogs, so the caveat on all of this is that some dogs, just like people, have barrier frustration. So you might have a dog who's jumping up and down and trying to jump over the gate or growling and running around and getting really overexcited, and then you remove the barrier and they couldn't care about anything. They're like, oh great, thanks, I'm gonna lay down over here. So it's not always bad if a dog doesn't like that. It might be they're just not used to it. They're not used to being separated from people when they're in the same place. And that's okay too. Okay, so now let's talk about you. When you're gonna get ready, how are you gonna protect yourself? How are you gonna set yourself up for success? Number one, don't dress like this. Dress safely, long pants, protective shoes, nothing dangly or noisy that could be surprising. Hats and sunglasses off, please. Dogs need a lot of contrast to see, and so when they can't see our eyes or when there's a shadow cast over our face, it's harder for them to interpret what we're doing. Dogs are super good at body language and at patterns, at knowing what we're doing and keeping an eye on us all the time. And so let's give them all the tools to be able to do that. Try not to fidget or wander. Keep your movement to a minimum without being creepy. And when you get in, try to get in and get settled. And try to settle with plenty of distance between you and the dog, so the dog gets to make the choice about whether they want to come see you or not. In that same vein, make sure there's plenty of exit ways. Like, this is a very nice setup for meeting a dog, right? Because the dog could go over there, they could go over there, they could go back there, and they wouldn't have to deal with me. And if they really didn't like me, I could go about there and get out of their way, right? A lot of good exit ways. If you feel unsafe, you can stand behind a piece of furniture. You can always bring a temporary shield with you. So you can have a clipboard or a laptop or a book and hold it across your middle of your chest. If you need to, if you feel unsafe as you're walking out, you can maybe put it down by your leg so you don't get nipped on the ankle, and just use that so you get out safely. Which brings us to, how do you exit? Move smoothly and slowly and predictably. So that word comes up all the time. Dogs feel better when they know what's going to happen. Just like people, right? Like for toddlers, we try to foreshadow transitions to make transitions easier. If dogs understand what's going to happen, if something is predictable, they're going to feel better. That's safer for them. Now, I just spent all that time telling you not to look a dog in the eye, and yet I want you to keep an eye on them. Like, know where the dog is so that you don't startle the dog as much as them not startling you. So use your peripheral vision, make a note if you're sitting in one room and they happen to go into a bedroom or go behind a bed or somewhere around the corner, so that you know where they are. So if on your exit, you don't happen to just stomp by the dog and surprise them and they get worried. You're going to want to decide whether turning away is safe or not. There's a particular kind of fear bite that happens on the ankle, and it generally happens as the person's leaving. And everybody's like, everything was going really well, and then he bit me. Just like people, dogs have, there's social pressure sometimes. And sometimes just all of us staring in the same, we can all see the same thing, we're all here, they feel a certain amount of social pressure. And they might still be nervous, but holding themselves together. And when we turn away, the social pressure is relieved, and that little bite is, get out and stay out. Tell your story walking, right? It's a distance increasing behavior, and depending on the size of the dog and whether you got your long pants on, it can have worse or better consequences. So you decide whether you want to walk out slowly and sideways, or whether you feel safe to just walk smoothly out forward. And use that barrier if you need to. I'm not today, but I usually carry a backpack, and I don't put it on my back. I hold it by the handle so that as I'm walking out, if I see a dog feel uncomfortable, I can just like slide that down. And if they make contact with the backpack. I understand that I did something that was upsetting for them, and we all walk out of there without having to make a report on anything, which keeps everybody safe. Like, keeping you safe keeps the dog safe. No dog ever benefited from having a bite record. Sorry, it was a really hard day today, and that is what happened, is somebody got bitten. So be careful, because in being careful, you are taking care of yourself, you're taking care of your tenants, and you're taking care of your tenants' families, their animals. So let's talk about ideal scenarios. Hilarious that I just talked. Yeah, and now let's talk about something that's going to be fine, right? Keep in mind, I'm a professional. This is my 9th year doing this. Ideal scenarios are rare for everyone. But if I can kind of show you an ideal scenario, then you at least know what the menu is to pick from, right? So, 30 seconds on the clock, please. You get to yell at me again. So, knowing what you know, we're going to look at a couple of kinds of greetings, and you're going to tell me what looks good and what you might change, all right? So, you're going to look at safety, protection, and exits. So here's Greg, it's Vivian's husband, with their 2 dogs, Willow and Mimi. What looks good? 30 seconds. Tell me what Greg's doing right, and tell me what the person behind the camera who's approaching is doing right. Distance. Leashes. Open space. Anything else?
Is he not moving?
He's not moving, right? He's waiting. Perfect. Yeah. What else? No eye contact. I like it. Yeah. What else?
Dogs are kind of like focused on him.
Yeah. So he's interesting enough. The dogs are paying attention to him. What else?
The dogs look like they're ready to charge on the camera now.
You think so? What makes you think that? Is it Mimi on the right? Because she would. Time. All right. Yeah. He's keeping them kind of close, right? He has leashes. So leashes are a safety line, not a steering wheel, right? They're just there to keep us all, keep our dog from getting into stuff that they shouldn't and making sure that they're close to us, right? So that's good. Is there anything, so I'm looking at one thing in particular. Is there any one thing Greg could change that would make it better? His posture. Ooh, there's two things then. Yes. Say again, escape. Better escape route and not facing forward. I also think he could be wearing some long pants. But he knows those dogs. It's not required for him. Okay, that's really good. It's nice to work with people whose job is observation, because that's my job too, and you're good at it. All right, so let's do some indoor greetings. This is me, and every time I look at it, I see something worse. So 30 seconds, tell me what looks good. Make me feel better. My standing? Leash? Long pants? Thank you. I'm not touching the dog? Yeah, what else? No eye contact, yep. What else?
Are you allowing them to smell you?
I'm allowing them to smell me. What else?
Does that package your barrier that's next to you?
Oh, it could be a barrier. Nice. I always think of that as a bad thing. Thank you. I feel so much better now. Yes, that could be a barrier. That could save me. What else?
The dog's on a leash.
Dog is on a leash. Yeah, somebody did point that out. That's good. You're not going into his house. I'm not walking in yet. Time. Beautiful. Is there anything you would change? My posture, my escape routes. Amen. What else?
The mask and the face.
Mask. I could take my mask down because that might be upsetting for them. Yeah.
Uncrossing your hands.
Uncrossing my hands. I could get my hands out of the way so they're not all dangly in the way. Yeah. Anything else?
And if that's not a barrier, just move that for their safety so that you don't go over there trying.
Yeah. Give me a clear exit. Yep. Absolutely. Beautiful. You guys are good at this. You're good. Goodbye. Have a great day. All right. I'm glad that we could have a fun conversation because now I get to be a downer again. So sometimes things go bad, right? And it's often nobody's fault. It's an accident of not being able to observe or something surprising happening that we don't have control over. This whole presentation is to protect you from being in a situation where an accident might happen. But you might be having challenging conversations with your tenants. Somebody might get agitated, and the dog might be worried about that. You might be having a good time and laughing and having an outburst, and that might surprise a dog who's on edge, who's nervous, right? If you're providing medical care, somebody might be in pain, and that might also be a thing that's hard for the dog to see or upsetting or unpredictable for them. So I'm going to give you a few super basic strategies to keep yourself safe if something bad is happening, if a dog is charging for you or trying to hurt you. Number one is most important. Stay on your feet. Stay on your feet at all costs. Keep your head up here and the dog down there. Stay on your feet. You can toss food. Now, I could give a 2-day version of this conference where I talk to you about strategically tossing food to build relationships with dogs. I don't want to do that. That's not your job. We can do it later. I'm happy to do it next year. But today, keep food. You're not going to offer food to a dog. If you're in an emergency situation, though, and you have a sandwich in your bag, chuck it at your dog. Just here, have my bacon, egg, and cheese. And because if that helps the dog feel better and gives you a moment to get out of the way, it's totally worth it, and nobody's harmed. You can use loud noises, even an air horn, to interrupt. Again, it's not going to change the behavior, but it might interrupt and give you a small space of time to move. And then you can use water. If you have a water bottle, it takes a minute to open it, but you can just cold water it. Again, a little shock to the system. But your best bet is to just get out and assess when you are safe, right? Get out smoothly and quickly. All right. So in summary, you got your safety measures, your preparation to set everybody up for success. You have your protective strategies things you can do to prepare your own body to set everybody up for success. You have your exit strategies, safe ways to get out of a situation, whether it's going great or not, and your emergency strategies, which are self-explanatory. And we're going to close out with a short video that is a couple of real-life examples of greeting a dog. So you can just kind of take a look at what that looks like. And I'm not going to ask you to shout out anymore, but you're good observers. See what you think. See what looks good and what you might change. All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thanks. There's some contact information on the sheets you're getting, and here too if you ever need to find us, and we have some handouts, some other behavior-specific handouts if you want to come talk afterwards. Thanks.
So don't go anywhere. That was just part one. So we're going to transition now into part two, and we're going to have a panel conversation. Kiz is going to join the panel, and there'll be plenty of time for question and answer at the end of the session. But first I want to just introduce the panel. I'm going to ask some questions, then we'll open things up for conversation among the panel, and then again, there'll be plenty of time for questions from you all as well. So to start, you all know Kiz, who's sitting here. If we can just go down the line and folks quickly introduce themselves, that would be great.
So I am Marina Nelson. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Property Management with Breaking Ground.
I'm Jill Maddox. I'm the Medical Director for Breaking Ground.
I'm Nelijah Mans. I'm the Assistant Building Director of one of the Breaking Ground properties.
I'm Eddie Martin. I live in one of the Breaking Ground buildings as a tenant with emotional support animal.
So I'm actually going to start with you, Eddie, for this first question. You shared with us about your emotional support animal, whose name is Butter. I have not met Butter in person, but I've seen Butter on video, and he is very cute.
Thank you.
I can attest to that. So even though he's not here, Eddie, can you tell us about Butter and why it's so important that you and Butter are able to live together in housing at the Lee?
Well, for me, it's important because I grew up as having a rough childhood, going from foster home to foster home, group home to group home, not trusting people, which then brought about my social anxiety. I became homeless. I was homeless for many, many years. Then one day, Butter came into my life, and for some reason, everything changed. I was more focused on helping him and getting him a better living situation, which then helped me, And because I'm Butter, I have been able to be around people, I can talk to people, and it's without him, I think I probably would have stayed homeless and content with my situation.
Thank you so much, Eddie. I just want to commend you. It's clear that Butter's taught you a lot if you have social anxiety and you're able to sit up here and be on this panel. So thank you so much for joining us. Jill, I'd like to come to you next. It's clear that Eddie cares deeply for Butter, and Kiz talked a little bit about some of the ways that you can talk about the dog to the human without interacting with the dog, and how it can be a great engagement tool in getting to know the human, the person, the tenant. So can you share some examples of how you've seen this show up in your practice with supportive housing tenants as a psychiatrist? And we also saw this during the One Health Clinic, and talk a little bit about the way that it can be such a helpful tool.
Sure, John. So I work as a psychiatrist in one of the buildings that Breaking Ground owns, and CECS provides social services. And we have emotional support animals in the building for the last several years. And I have a few patients who have gotten dogs over the last few years and seen really the difference that it makes in their life, that they're much more open to new experiences. They are really more invested in living their life and being healthier and taking care of their apartment because now there's someone else there that they want to have a nice environment for. So I've seen a lot of positive change. And in the One Health clinic, I loved this opportunity to meet people with their dog. We do that a little bit in homeless outreach too, if people on the street have a dog. But, as the psychiatrist, usually people who are unhoused are coming to me for a psychiatric evaluation. That's the first time I meet them. And the evaluation, there's just so much shame, we all know it's a population that experiences a lot of shame for so many reasons, from their history, from how they're living now, substance use. And then in the psych evaluation, I'm asking them to tell me all their problems. And I'm asking, do you have this problem? Do you have that problem? Do you have that problem? Being able to meet people with their animal, especially when they're bringing their animal in for care, is just such a nice place to start with, like, your dog is so sweet, so well behaved, it's so great that you're bringing him to the doctor, you're doing a great job. Really allows people to feel good about themselves and start an engagement from there. And it's just so much more likely that we're gonna have a good engagement and people might come back to get healthier, right? And there's also sort of the motivation people experience of having the animal, that if they're healthier, the animal's healthier, really can motivate people.
Thanks, Jill. I want to shift away from that human-animal bond itself and think a bit about the larger community and the supportive housing milieu generally. So, Nelijah, you are the assistant building director at the Lee, where Eddie is a tenant. And your particular building has animals like Butter, but does not allow pets. It allows emotional support animals and service animals. Can you talk about the challenges and bright spots in managing a building where humans and animals are living together?
Yes. Everyone can hear me, correct? Okay. So I'll start with the bright spots. In your day-to-day, a lot of people here probably wish you could bring your pet to work with you. We're permanent housing, so a lot of our tenants have been here for many years and so have their pets. And so we get, as far as, the employee side of things, that breath of fresh air along with the tenants. That's like a little personality that comes and kind of brightens up your day, and they're always happy to see you. You offer them treats, they'll let you pet them, things like that. So that's one of the good things. But then, as Jill mentioned, you do see the difference with the tenant. Having that pet kind of gives them a purpose outside of themselves and a reason to do better. Goes from apartment conditions, like I need to have a clean space for my pet to live and habitate. I need to make sure, my pet has food and I'll have food, things of that nature, going for walks. That way the tenant's getting the fresh air, getting that exercise, and so is the animal. So you definitely see that. And, well, yeah, those are the bright side of things. For the challenges, though, people are different. So you have the tenants who love pets, and then you have the tenants who are uneasy around pets. They might have some traumas from before that may come into play. So that's things that you need to work out as far as common areas and things like that. Or there may be some tenants who aren't incapable of properly caring for their pet all the way. So then, that pet's waste, or, are they getting bathed, or even going outside for the walks can become a challenge. And then behavior of the different types of animals too can be a thing that we've come across and have to figure out along the way.
Thanks. And we're going to, we'll save your question for sure, because I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions here. So Jill, just quickly before we move on, we're talking sort of all in one bucket of pets, emotional support animals, service animals, but they are different. So I'm hoping that you could give us a quick rundown for those who may not be as familiar about the differences between those categories, and then how psychiatry is involved, particularly in the folks with emotional support animals, and what that process looks like with the staff at the site.
Yes. So there is a lot of confusion between the terms and which animals have had which training. So service animals are animals, dogs usually, who are trained to do a specific task for someone with a disability. So a seeing eye dog is the one we know the most, who has the dog has a lot of special training to do the tasks for the person who is blind, and also a lot of special training in behaving properly in all situations, right? So that everything stays safe around the disabled person. And so that's kind of like the highest level of training for an animal. An emotional support animal provides companionship for a person with a psychiatric disability, and that companionship alleviates some symptoms of their psychiatric illness. So there's no special training to be an emotional support animal. Any animal can be an emotional support animal. The owner, in order to have the animal certified as an emotional support animal, has to have a letter from a mental health professional saying that they have a psychiatric disability and the presence of the animal alleviates at least one symptom of the illness. And that means, and according to Fair Housing Act, if you have an emotional support animal, even buildings that don't allow pets have to allow the emotional support animal like they have to allow service animals. A pet is just a pet, provides companionship. I think many of us would say that alleviates symptoms of mental illness also, and is a very healthy thing, but there's no special status for a pet. Another term that just gets mixed into this sometimes is a therapy animal. And a therapy animal is not actually providing a service to the owner, but has some training and ability to provide a service in a structured environment to other people of, you know, the therapeutic benefits of being around an animal. So those are the dogs that go into a hospital or things like that, just to provide a good experience for people.
And can you talk about how psychiatry is involved with emotional support animals and what that looks like?
Yes. So at Breaking Ground, we decided that if our clients are saying that they want an emotional support animal in our housing, also in our safe havens, our transitional residences, the psychiatrist would be the person. Most of our programs have on-site psychiatry that works for my agency, Janian, and I supervise them. So we made a policy that the people would be referred to the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist would get a heads up ahead of time. We think the person's going to ask for a letter. And this, you know, the whole thing with emotional support animals, I think, really put psychiatrists in an uncomfortable position of having to be the person that decides, does this person get an animal in their no-pet building? And it's hard, you know, when somebody is your patient to say no to that. But in our situations, there are a lot of variables, right? And we don't want to have somebody owning an animal and with them in their housing that then becomes so much of a stress to them, if they're not able to take care of it properly, that it's not beneficial for their mental health. It could actually be detrimental to their mental health if they've taken on something that's not appropriate. So the communication with the team is really important, and we tell the team not to tell the client ahead of time, oh, the doctor is going to write you the letter, right? It's going to be talk to the doctor about the letter, and we're going to have a discussion as a team. We also instruct our psychiatrists never to just write a letter right away for a client, to always talk to the team first. So if you're in a session and a surprise question comes up, the answer is, I understand what you're asking. I'm going to talk with the team, and we're going to figure out what's the best way to go. Because, one, there might be things going on that make it an unhealthy decision for this person to own an animal. And also it can provide, Marina's going to talk more about this, but it can be an opportunity for motivating change, right? To say like, well, I think it would be best, I'd like to see before you get the animal, I'd like to see you budgeting better, I'd like to see you, taking your medication more regularly so that all know you'll be able to take care of this animal. So we have those conversations, and we use it as an opportunity to really explore like some of the ADLs and lifestyle of the client too.
Great. Marina, I'm going to come to you for this. So Jill spoke a little bit about the way in which this process is sort of insulated from property management, because a property manager is ultimately the person's landlord, but sometimes the service provider may be the same or different to who is providing the property management at a given building. So from a property management perspective, Marina, what goes into the collaboration with the service provider around the decision to bring an animal into the building, whether it's within the same organization or a different organization when a tenant has an animal?
So I think to start with, working together with social services in our building comes, communication comes into play a lot, right? And we partner really closely. So we got to partner with with social services a lot in terms of knowing a tenant's mental health status, right? When a tenant requests a service animal or an emotional support animal, the communication comes into play because property management on our end, we do things like unit inspections, so we know what units look like. And I don't think it's fair to an animal, if you want to care for that animal, to bring it into a cluttered unit or a unit that is not cared for. So that's where we sit down, like Jill mentioned, and we have these conversations that a tenant is requesting an emotional support animal, but yet we don't want to say no, but we use that as leverage to work with the tenant. Tenants may want to bring in the animal, and like we mentioned, unit condition issues may come up into play. We also find that tenants may not be paying their rent, and that might be leverage to get them to do it, because like Eddie mentioned, there are times where they want to care for the animal so much that they're willing to do anything to bring the animal in. So we use that as leverage as well. The mental health status with medication is something that's communicated across the board, because we don't want to bring an animal into a space where if you're unable to care for yourself, you're not going to be able to care for this animal, right? So communication is a big piece of it, I will say, in terms of property management, collaborating and partnering with social services. When a tenant is unable to care for themselves, is a sense of pride, and I believe Nalesia or Jill touched on that. It's a sense of pride, and it's a very touchy subject for most of our tenants to tell them, where you're not caring for yourself and you're unable to bring in this animal. And I think when we work with them, we sort of give them timestamps. Like, if you want this animal, we know you want it really soon, but let's work together with your caseworker to try to give you timestamps to work on certain things, whether it be to clean up your unit or you do some things to yourself personally, and start taking your medication, do that, and then we measure the progress. So it's not like we're telling a tenant, no, you cannot have that animal, but we're using it as leverage to allow you to have the animal and really advocate for you to have it. Because at the end of the day, we really want them to get the support, but yet we want them to be in a safe space.
Thanks, Marina. I'm going to come back to you for a sort of follow-up question that I'm going to use to open up a couple other questions, which is, I understand that the policy on animals differs between breaking ground buildings. Mm-hmm. Breaking ground has multiple buildings, and the policy on animals differs between those buildings, and it's changed over time. So can you talk about how and why policies about animals have changed over time, and what considerations have gone into making those policies for an individual building?
So I would say breaking ground is 20 properties strong right now, but we didn't start there. In 1991, Breaking Ground opened their first property, which was the Times Square, and they allowed animals in the building. Sort of 8 years later, we opened the Prince George, and animals was allowed. However, by allowing animals, we understand, like Eddie mentioned, a lot of our tenants come in by having animals in the street, and we wanted them to actually come in together. So that was one of the reasons why we did that. However, by facing such challenges as animals not being trained, animals defecating and urinating around the building, we wanted to create some type of policy so that we streamline it. And in the interim of trying to create this policy, by trying to target all these challenges that we were facing, there were animals that were being aggressive to other animals, aggressive to staff, aggressive to visitors. So we wanted to find a way. So after the Prince George and the Times Square, and us allowing animals in, we just put a stop to it pretty much and allowed for only a reasonable accommodation to allow service animals, only support animals in the building. However, in that time, we created policy around the challenges that we face. So now there is a pet policy where you're allowed to have, or you're permitted to have these support animals and service animals, but the policy was based around those challenges. So there are things that tenants must do. They must complete certain forms. They must have their pets registered with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. They must have leashes. They're, like Nalisha mentioned earlier, when they're in common spaces, they must be able to be on a leash. They're not allowed to roam the building. They're not allowed to sit in the lobby. It's like entry and exit. There are many policies that we came about because of these challenges, just to make sure that the tenants are safe, the staff is safe, and so most of all the tenant, and that the end goal of them having their emotional support animal with them.
Thanks, Marina. You talked a little bit about the policies and processes that you use to manage multiple animals in a building. Eddie, you shared with me prior to this some of the strategies that you use as a community member to keep yourself safe, to keep Butter safe, to keep others safe. Can you share what some of those are?
Yes. My strategy is because Butter wasn't always as friendly as he was. You know, Butter was kind of in the same situation I was. You know, when I got him, he was caged up, aggressive, even attacked me. But I didn't care. I decided I was going to work with him. You know, it took me years. I worked with him. But my strategies I use is, I've learned with Butter his signs, his body language. I've learned all this with him. You know, because every dog does have body language, but some dogs' language is different. You know, like Butter, he will not growl at you. He will not bark at you. He will not give you any warnings. You understand? If he comes up to you to smell you, he wants to smell you. That's it. Do not reach for him. You know? So, with all these things that I know about Butter, I always keep my dog on a leash. Never off the leash, especially when I'm in common areas. You know? Now, like being in a building, there are other people that are afraid of Butter or of dogs, period. So I have to take all these things into factor. You know, so when I'm standing on my floor waiting for the elevator and it opens up and the person on the elevator is afraid of dogs, no problem. I'll wait for the next one. Go. I wait. You understand? Just because my dog's a service dog and most a sport dog, you know, which they do have more rights than we do. You know, that's how it works. But I don't believe that. You know, you have to also think about the people around you and how they feel. If it terrifies them. You know, you have to take precautions and make sure that people around you feel safe.
Thanks, Eddie. You actually answered one of the other questions I was going to ask, so I'm going to skip it and move on to the next one. There are a lot of folks in this room who are probably involved in new supportive housing projects that are getting started, some of which are probably still at the planning phases. We know how much supportive housing is needed in this city. So I want to start with Kiz for this question, but then others can chime in if they have additional thoughts. So Kiz, what are some design considerations for those in the room who may be getting ready to design or build supportive housing buildings? What are design considerations that folks might want to keep in mind if they're going to be developing a supportive housing building and they would like to eventually allow animals and humans to live in that building together?
Julie and I talked about this all the way over. Like, we have so many deep cut ideas we would like. But the basic thing is, I want more exits and I want wide pathways. I want ways, like if Eddie's going to be waiting for the elevator and he doesn't know who's going to come off, I want him to have room to be out of the way. So if somebody else comes off with a dog, nobody gets surprised. I want things like, if you have a mail room or a front desk, I want there to be enough flow that people either come in one way and go out the other way, so you never get surprised by somebody blocking a doorway, or to have a few exits. Like if we have a bunch of mailboxes, can we have several rows of them so I can go through this row or that row? One of Julie's certifications is she's a fear-free certified trainer, And they have a whole program about how you would set up a veterinary clinic to help to help animals feel better. And the truth is, I was talking to John, it's the same stuff you do to make people feel better. Like, let's have some warmer lighting. Let's have, be able to grip, not so many slippery floors. Some dogs are afraid. Can we have runners so that we can walk safely, so that elderly dogs aren't in pain? And then just doors that are easy to open would be really nice as well. I could go on. There's anybody else? Julie's probably going to start holding up signs to me at this point. We would love to build the perfect building, which may never exist.
I know at the league, one thing some tenants have brought up, we have a front garden space and a back garden space, which we consider as common spaces. So those with pets feel, well, why is there nowhere on site that my dog can run around? We're fortunate enough that we are across the street from a park, so that, alleviates that for now. But for future building, I would think, if there's two separate areas, one that's pet friendly, and then one that, is pet restrictive, that way each type of tenant has their own kind of space for them to feel comfortable and go outside and do things like that. That would be really good.
So nice.
That leads me to my next question, which is Marina or Elijah or anyone who wants to sort of chime in. Some of the buildings including the Lee, some of the buildings that Breaking Ground owns and operates are much older. So have there been modifications that have been made over time to make them more conducive to animals and humans coexisting, if that's the case at the given building?
I wouldn't say any structural changes or anything like that. It's more so the policies that are in place. And then we rely heavily on the neighboring of the community, how neighborly you are to each other. Like Eddie said, he's very considerate of others and their fears and uncomfortabilities, allergies even, things of that nature. So again, in common spaces, it's really for a pass-through. But, in front of the building, tenants with dogs tend to stand off to the side or go to the park. But there's not like, a little dog door or a doggy entrance or things like that, no.
Yeah, great. I'm just keeping an eye on the time because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to rework this question a little bit and talk a little bit about animal behavior. So Elijah or Marina or Eddie, you may have witnessed this from other community members at the building. Are there particular behavioral issues that have presented specific challenges at a site, your site, and how were those handled? And then I'm going to come to Kiz for a follow-up question.
So recently, actually, a new dog came on site as an emotional support animal. Not necessarily trained, there's a lot of tenants in the building. There's a lot of people in and out. There's vendors, visitors, staff. So they weren't necessarily acclimated to all of that motion, commotion. Also a puppy. So, they're not a little puppy, a bigger puppy, but a puppy. Just very interactive and alert and energetic. So one of the things they would do was bark a lot and sometimes growl. The growl, some are aggressive, not so much. But because we can't tell which it is, when we set up that policy with that particular tenant, we included that one in common areas, in addition to the lease, that the dog wear a muzzle. And it doesn't have to be, forever, but just until they get acclimated, get used to it, trained a little better, and those behaviors start to change, then we can, revisit the policy with that person and sign another one where the muzzle is no longer needed. But that's one where we have our overall policy, but then we can do specific things depending on the pet and their behavior and the concerns of the building and others. The muzzle is one of those things. So different things like that.
Kiz, do you want to say anything about muzzles?
They're awesome, and every dog should have that skill, because there may come a day where they need to wear it, and I'd rather spend some time training you to wear a muzzle happily, so that if the day comes, that's not an additional stressor to you. So it's a fabulous skill. Everybody should have it, and there's great ways to train them to wear it, and everybody's making them super cute now and decorating them.
And they're one of those safety tools, right? They've gotten a bad rap.
Absolutely, and there are lots of. So there's a funny story about it, right? I have a lot of clients who have dogs who wear muzzles because there's a bite risk, but there's also a bunch of them are wearing it because they will kill themselves eating something bad off the street.
And so while we train good drop-its and leave-its, we keep the dog safe by using this barrier method. So I had a client who we were training to wear a muzzle, and it was just as we were coming out of lockdown, the first little bits of it. And he's also worried about kids. So we put a muzzle on him, and his person was like, you know what? I'm really, this is gonna serve a couple of purposes, and one is kids will stay away. Except kids were wearing masks. And they kept looking at him and saying, hey, he's wearing a mask too. Fortunately, he's learned to love kids. He tried to walk into an elementary school, but.
Any other resources, or not just sort of aggression growling, but any other resources for behavioral issues that crop up? Do you want to sort of name drop any of the organizations or sort of tools that people can access?
So the ACC, the New York Animal Care and Control, has a lot of tools in place. They have a program for food. If you're having trouble affording food, you do have to go pick it up, which can be a pain in the neck, but you can do that. They have equipment. If you're in a housing situation where they say, I'm sorry, you can't have your dog if you don't have a leash or a muzzle, they can provide that equipment for you. They're committed to home retention. They have veterinary services and different ways to access that, mobile and in their locations. And they also have behavioral services. They have training services where they saw how well offering veterinary services increased home retention. And so they did a pilot program to see if they could offer training services and would that increase home retention. And so now if someone comes to relinquish a dog, they have a conversation about it. And if the person is interested in training and thinks that might help, they have a list of trainers, and Julia and I are two of many. And they go to us and say, can someone help this person? Can they? And we can help virtually. The pandemic has taught us how much we can do that way, or in person, depending on location. And I don't know if the policy has changed. It used to be that they would pay for up to 3 visits from a trainer for ongoing assistance to help resolve issues like barking or overstimulation in the lobby and things like that. There's also, I don't have it written down, it's Paws New York is an organization where volunteers will walk dogs or feed cats or do that kind of, I think it's mostly walking dogs though, for folks who are having an issue where they can't get out and they can't walk the dog. So I don't know the process very well, but I have a friend and colleague, one of Julie's clients, who works for them, who volunteers for them. And she's enjoyed really meeting the people and walking the dogs and had a really good time.
Last couple quick questions before we open it up. That segues perfectly. Marina and Elijah, what happens if someone has an animal and they go to the hospital or they go to a nursing home, or how do you handle those situations?
So like Nanisha had mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, we do have policies in place, and part of the policy is the registration form that you fill out for the building. You have to list at least 2 emergency contacts, similar like you will do for us, right? Like we all have emergency contacts. And in that situation, we will reach out to that emergency contact to say, hey, this is the situation. We will need your assistance to come on. Sometimes they will come on site and they will take the animal off site and care for the animal while the tenant is in the hospital or in rehab or wherever they are. And then they will make arrangements. There are times where they will make arrangements with property management to say, well, I can't take it off site, but I can come on site and I can do this, that, and the third. So we will give access to that person to come in. They will take the dog, they will feed them, they will make sure that they bathe, they will take them for walks, and they will care for that animal while they're there. In those cases, we often will want them to have like a cage in the unit so the dog can be there. In the event staff needs to go in and do like a unit inspection or some type of audit that is coming up and we need to enter those units, but there is emergency contact that we normally would require. The only caveat to that is that sometimes they list their caseworkers or our staff as their emergency contact, and then we gotta sit down and discuss exactly how we're gonna strategize in terms of caring for the animal while the tenant is away.
And just to add to that, the pet registration is done annually, regardless if you've registered your pet before or not. That way that emergency contact list is kept up to date.
Great. Awesome. And as a sort of follow-up to Jill, hopefully a person is able to get the care that they need proactively so that they don't have to go to the hospital on an emergency basis. But how might, part of that, if they have an emotional support animal, some of the symptoms may be that the person decreases what care looks like for their animal. So how would you address a situation in which someone has an emotional support animal but develops symptoms or behaviors that result in the person not being able to care for the animal?
Right, so, I mean, hopefully we would be able to help the person before it reaches a point where it's really unsafe for them to have the animal. If it's really unsafe, then I guess we would go to the emergency contact. But I think it's a good, usually people don't decompensate overnight. We would see some signs, and I think a lot of talking about, when you get really depressed, you might not be able to walk the dog, and then that's gonna be a problem for the dog, and it's gonna be a problem for you. So let's address this right away. I'm starting to see some signs. You're starting to tell me you don't feel so good. Let's not wait. Let's make sure. Just like in all the other ways that having a pet or emotional support animal can help with motivation, I think around identifying episodes early and addressing things early can be really helpful.
And my last question here is for Eddie. Eddie, what would you tell people who are getting ready to move into supportive housing with an animal?
What I would tell people is that when you're moving into supportive housing with an animal, you have to make sure that you know all the body language of your dog. You have to know how your dog is going to react, his eyes, every little thing before you want to move into supportive housing. And you want to know what else is in that building besides you coming with your dog. Because just because your dog might be okay doesn't mean everybody else around you is okay. Doesn't mean the other dogs are okay. Because, like Elijah had said about a situation where a dog has to be muzzled in the building, it's due to the fact that that dog had attacked my dog. Bit my dog right in the face. Wasn't a lot of damage, a little scratch on his face. My dog didn't react. My dog ran and sat behind me. These are things you want to, before you move in, is know how your dog is going to react to something that's going to happen.
Thanks, Eddie. Butter is very lucky to have you, for sure.
Thank you.
I want to open it up. We've got about 15 minutes left. I want to open it up for questions for any of the panelists. Yes.
So there's a lot of talk of how to work with pets coming in. Can you guys share any resources on if you have to remove a pet now? Because that sometimes is the case on the property management side, where there's just a disconnect between the tenant and the pet, or safety, or what have you, and so they may have come in with it one way, but now it's at a point where the pet needs to be removed. So if maybe there's any resources outside of property management or psychiatric care that could possibly help with that transition.
Do you want to talk? Go ahead, and then I want Kiz to talk about getting connected to this resource.
She should probably talk first, because I kind of have the same thing as her.
Can you say more specifically how people can get connected to that?
So
the ACC
yeah,
resource?
so anybody can call the ACC. So one of the recent cases that I was called for them was a director of a shelter called me to say that they were having an issue like that. So it's you can Google the number for the ACC and call them, and somebody will talk to you about what all their resources are. The Animal Care and Control in New York City is it's a city organization, so it is required to take any animal that is dropped off. That's why they get the cows and the snakes and the tigers and everything else. But it also means that time is short for that animal. So I'm glad, they're overcrowded right now, but they will offer you what services they can, and they're connected to trainers who are able to help and rescues who might be able to help and other resources like that. So they're really your one-stop shopping for that. But if you as an organization have some resources, if you meet people through there, keep their numbers. There's a huge crisis of homeless animals right now, so I don't have a lot of upbeat information to give you, but they are the people that would help you remove an animal, or particularly dangerous animal, in any situation.
I will add, we were directed in the direction of the ASPCA, who then directed us to NYPD. However, NYPD is not too sure on how to assess that type of situation. They're more so looking for like physical abuse, and that's not the only type of abuse that can happen with an animal. So then we were kind of redirected back to ASPCA. As far as, like, obviously it depends on the case and why you want to remove the animal. But then, leave letters just as any lease violation, which would then turn into like legal and all other things to see if we could even cure. Because our goal isn't, like, I don't want to take your emotional support from you. I just want to work with you so that you do better and that you can keep that pet. So maybe, the legal route will have them do better. And that's where we're at right now.
And I think to add, that's where the communication with social service comes into play, because sometimes the tenant doesn't have the mental capacity to do so. So we need to work with social services a lot to say, like, hey, this is what we're seeing, this is what we are observing, and it doesn't seem like the tenant has the mental capacity to make those type of decisions. And that is often, like Natasha mentioned, it leads into legal, because then we're caught in that gray area. Like, we don't want to take your pet away. We don't want the SPCA to come and actually take your pet away, but yet we try to work with you. And I think in this particular case, we've reached out to like many people, like dog walkers that can come in and take the dog and walk the dog, because the tenant is not even physically able to do so himself at this point, right? So there are numerous conversations that are happening with the end goal of you not having to take your pet away, but yet making sure that the tenant and the pet is in a safe space. So.
I would just quickly say that, as in some other cases, the NYPD is your last resort, because they don't have any animal expertise. Like, in the situations few situations I've observed where they've been involved, 9 times out, it tends to be some guy on the squad who has a dog shows up and does what he does with his own dog. And that's a big gamble.
There was a question in the back, and then I see one up here. Yes, in the back.
In the beginning, you all stated when you are going over a client wanting to get an emotional support, pet, animal, dog, or whatever, and you said you guys consider medications and all of that, right? So if they're in therapy, let's say, you're making goals or a treatment plan, what if the, patient client wants to work towards that? Is that something that you all do? I know it can take like a long time, like maybe a year, or even longer. Is that something that y'all do? And if so, how does that go about? What does that look like for you all as a team, or, I don't know.
Yeah, I think we would be talking as a team about how is the person now. The practice for the psych provider is the criteria for emotional support animal really is just, does the person have a psychiatric disability, and would a symptom of the illness be alleviated by the presence of an animal? So we're a little bound by that person should get a letter, but the leverage or the negotiating point or the working point is really, are symptoms really going to be alleviated if the person is so unwell that they can't really take care of the animal properly? Maybe that's going to really make their situation worse if they have an animal that's not well cared for and then has to be removed. That, certainly would be devastating. So it would be a lot of talking with the team, talking with the client, who often the patient wants what they want right now. But talking about, like, look, it's not going to be a good situation if you aren't addressing your illness, or if you aren't budgeting, or, if you aren't caring for yourself, right? If your ADLs for yourself aren't good, then it's not going to be a good situation for you to have a pet. So let's make a list of the things that we would want to see that would show us you're ready to have an emotional support animal.
And just to add to Jill, I think we don't want to focus on the end goal, which is the tenant getting well. We want to focus a lot on progress. So it starts with the tenant taking ownership of them actually having that illness and needing the help. And once we're able to see that, and like Jill said, we meet and we discuss and we have these meetings, it's like more, are we able to measure any type of progress to allow them to have this animal, as opposed to working towards the end goal as them getting well. We don't want to wait until 3, 6, 9 months down the road for them to get an animal when they went as soon as possible, pretty much. But if we're able to measure in 3 weeks, a month, 6 weeks, or at least 2 months to say, well, okay, they've shown progress, then we can talk that over and say, well, hey, they're in a good space and they can have that animal.
Up here.
In the event where the tenant loses their animal, either they pass away or their animal gets taken away from them, and Jilly spoke about how devastating that might feel, are there any resources or support groups or grief groups that you guys provide, or how does that process look like for the tenants?
So I think I've experienced that before where a tenant pet passed away. We work closely with social services to create a space for them to be able to talk about it. Oftentimes they don't want to talk and they isolate. So we'd like to get them to talk. And sometimes, in this case, they didn't even want to have another animal because they will relive exactly what happened, right? So I think it takes time for them to be able to open up and like get the grief counseling, similar you get with a human, to be able to get them to that point where, yeah, I see the need for me to have that animal. And then we have conversations around how great you were doing when you had the animal as opposed to how you're doing now, and measure the pros and cons for them to see the need that they need the animal again, for them to open up to wanting it. So.
I don't know off the top of my head, I don't know, Julie, if you or kids do, but there are pet bereavement groups.
Yeah.
And there also is, I think it's still the only one, but actually I was hoping that she was going to be on this panel as well, but she's got married last week. There is the University of Tennessee at Nashville, or the University of Nashville, has actually a veterinary social work program, and I'm sure that they have resources for, it's a specific certification that social workers can get that's fairly new, that's to work not only with humans who have lost an animal or are dealing with some sort of stressor that's causing them to not be able to care for the animal, but to also work with veterinarians who also have the sort of like stress of, putting people's animals to sleep, or, telling people that their animal has a terminal diagnosis. So
Veterinarians are at a high risk of suicide. We've lost so many veterinarians in the last 2.5 years that there's a crisis in veterinary care as well. Wow. So be kind to your vets.
Other questions? Wow. I think we've got time for one more. Was that the time signal? Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
I'm dealing currently with a tenant who. I'm currently dealing with a tenant who currently he's detoxing, but then we came to find out that he was hiding an 8-month-old kitten. And so now we're at a crossroads as to, we want to send him, he wants to go, but he's so worried about leaving his 8-month-old kitten. How do you deal with that type of situation, or if there's any resources to a place to hold the 8-month-old kitten while they go away to detox, and then make sure that they're able to come back, because he doesn't want to give his kitten away.
So I will guess that he didn't fill out registration paperwork and there's no emergency contact. In that case, you got to have the conversation, because if they want the pet to be well while they're gone, they got to make that decision to not have the pet stay alone. So we'll be trying to reach out to him and have those conversations to say, like, do you have a family member or a friend or someone? And oftentimes our homeless people, they have friends who are still homeless, that are on the street, that will even care for them more than they will even care for themselves. So I think it's opening up the conversations to say, hey, do you really want this pet to be well while you're gone? Because we want you to be well and go, and we want the pet to be well as well. You know what I mean? So have those conversations, find someone that can probably care for it while it's gone.
And the organization Kiz mentioned, Pause, that's one of the things that they do is come and care for animals whose people are in the hospital or et cetera.
Or like fostering is an option. Sometimes
Yes.
there are agencies that arrange fostering. And I've also heard there's a local shelter in Brooklyn that will sometimes take animals temporarily, to stay there.
Yes, we'll go here and then we'll go there.
Just to piggyback off her question, so
that to have supportive animals, or they need to have certain documentations and registrations and all of those things. And these clients many times can't afford to get the animals up to date with their shots and stuff like that. Are there resources available that we can utilize to assist them with getting up to speed with the animals so that they can retain their animals?
So the Animal Care and Control has traveling, and the ASPCA both have traveling veterinary services as well as veterinary services at their locations. And I would guess that if you, like, I'm making a big problem for the ACC and the SPCA, but I feel like if you had a large building with many pets and you talk to them, they have mobile veterinary units. You could say, like, hey, could we have a day? Could we have veterinary day? And sometimes, a lot of the times, the ACC, both of them actually, when they do clinics in particular areas, if they're going to go to a certain area and let people know that the van will be here and you can get spaying and neutering, they will have wandering trainers as well, so that we work the line while they're waiting to get their pet in for veterinary care. So we can talk about training and safety and those kinds of things at the same time that you're getting that kind of care. But that care is available to you through them, and those programs are reaching out all the time.
You can also reach out to Street Dog Coalition. You couldn't hear her, but Biana works with Street Dog Coalition. She also works at ASPCA, but she volunteers with Street Dog Coalition. We didn't talk much about the one health clinic that we did, but we literally had a day where Jill and her colleagues were on site, and vets from Street Dog Coalition were on site. And the rule is you can get free veterinary care for your animal, but you have to say hello to the human health care provider. You don't have to do an exam or anything, but you at least have to say hello. And we just did our second one and had many more folks than the first one, but Street Dog Coalition has a bunch of volunteer vets, and they provide they will do vaccines. Speaking of One Health, the idea of One Health is that humans and animals' health is connected. COVID taught us that, right? And it's beneficial for everyone, not just the animal and not just the humans in the building, but for us as a society, for animals to be up to date on their vaccines, right? So there are a lot of resources that give free vaccination. Time for one more question. Yes, there was. Sorry, sir, can we have her go first and then we'll get to you?
So mine is quick. It might be really easy. I'm a program director in, I don't need it, in supported housing. And we have one tenant that has an emotional support dog, but we are getting a lot of complaints when she goes to program. She has it in a little cage and it's just barking whenever somebody walks by the door. So it's day and night, and we're starting to get complaints. And it's our first emotional support dog. So how do we address this with our tenant and like to make the other ones know that we do care? You know, it's a new dog. They're not used to the barking and all that other stuff. So I'm just trying to resolve the problem before they start calling 311 to make noise complaints.
Kids, 30 seconds, how to get a dog to stop barking.
Call the ACC, get them hooked up with a trainer to do some work. And if you have any way to mitigate the sound coming into the apartment, if you can give that tenant a fan to blow at the door, if you can put some kind of sound mitigation, if you can move that crate into the farthest place from the front door, then if we reduce the stimulation coming to the dog, hopefully we reduce the barking coming out, and then the trainer can do the rest.
Good work. Thank you, everyone.